Like a bird returning to its home, human beings have returned to Africa. One of their biggest interests is Egypt. And I say this a lot, but it's something to think about. Isn't it amazing how early human beings left Africa and they landed up in multiple continents, from Asia to the Americas, and even as far as Oceania? When they landed on these places, they came with the same potential that most Africans have. And you would expect that the greatest civilization to ever exist would be somewhere located around these continents, since there was more people and more spread out nations. But still, it's the continent of Africa that has easily the oldest and greatest civilization known to man. Now, I saw this video earlier today and I thought, okay, well, it's time to watch it. And I did. And the first thing I noticed was that they had Zahi Hawass on there, and he basically gave the same takes that he normally gives. And then they had these two guys who I forgot their name, but they were basically quizzing Zahi Hawass on the pyramids and what's under the pyramids and all of that. But what really happened was they talked about the same things they've always been talking about. Why does he not know the word Zip Tepi? Why is there, why is the corner so smooth? And why do the pyramids have such great maths in there? And these might be great questions, but the obvious question that was missed, and I can tell if you look at the faces why it was missed, is why does Zahi Hawass dismiss the black African component of the ancient Egyptians? Now, the funny thing about this is that every time some African, black African, tries to talk about ancient Egypt, one of the first arguments we get is, why don't you guys talk about your own civilizations? Which I think is one of the most hilarious things, because the majority of people who talk about Egypt, especially in books and online, are people who don't even live in the continent of Africa. And so I don't understand how they can arrogantly say that we should not be able to talk about our continent, but they can come over here and give incredibly deep takes, I guess, about this very specific place. But the only places we're allowed to focus on is what? West Africa, the Bantus, the Swahili coast. And believe me, it is not a mistake that they speak in this way. This is by design. It's to undermine the educational history of Africa and to put us somewhere in the back. You've even seen Egyptians, modern Egyptians, say that it's embarrassing for black Africans to have pride in Egypt since we were quote unquote slaves, which is funny because in this very video, Zahi Hawass was addressing the fact that the people who built the pyramids were not slaves. Now, of course, this doesn't mean there were no slaves in ancient Egypt, but they did not have as many in their history. So, having said that, it's time to return to this video that was just showing the intro last time about this guy who claims that he can prove 100% that the black component of ancient Egyptians is irrelevant in the history of Egypt, and that there was no mass migrations ever inside of Egypt. And I will make a video about the multiple times that Africans left Africa, including the one that spread us throughout the entire world.
claim that emerged out of inferiority complex and creating divisions and animosity between the children of this great continent of Africa.
So I want to address this part again. That's why I'm starting this far back, because I think the last time I didn't point out a couple things. The animosity between North Africans and Sub Saharan Africans, if you want to call them that, did not start with Afrocentrist scholars claiming that they were part of Egypt or part of Morocco. The animosity started years ago during the Islamic age when a lot of the Muslims at the top started calling the people at the bottom slaves and words like that. It then got heightened during the time of the Ottomans when the Ottomans decided that they too wanted to join in on the fun of racism. And then it got worse when the Europeans took over and they decided that they want to turn this mythological science into a fact. And then they too joined in and tried to separate the people of Africa so that they could fight against each other. So, to put the separation of North Africa and the South Africans or Southern Africans at the feet of Afrocentrists is hilarious.
So the question is, are ancient Egyptians black?
So, in order to answer this question, because I know his answer is going to be probably no, to probably answer this question, even the most conservative views on Egypt. So, in other words, the people who say maybe 90% of ancient Egyptians were Middle Eastern, they still say that there is a huge amount of them, maybe 10%, who would have been black. And that is the people who think that there was a lot of Middle Eastern people there, people who are not crazy. I'm not talking about people who are white supremacists fully or any of those people. I'm talking about the proper people. So Nubia, we always know, has always been part of Egypt, and Nubia and other parts of Egypt that had black people, including parts of Libya that belonged to Nubia, but has shifted powers, right? Those places, we know by written history that they had black Africans, parts that the Beja took over, and there's still studies that I will talk about the Beja and the other people, the Sudanese people, and how they separated early before any Middle Eastern component came down, and how even to this day, the studies separate Sudan North and Sudan South, and the Arabic component that came in and changed those people forever.
Were they a black civilization that was replaced by non black people?
I think it's also telling that he started off in the beginning by saying they were neither white, black, nor aliens. But the one thing that he's pushing up against is on the black thing. And he barely ever talks about the white people who claim to be the real ancient Egyptians. But I think it's also a very limiting question when your question starts and finishes with, did the people who replaced them, were they black or white? Well, here's the better question. Was there a replacement? This unbiases your question. If you say, were they black and they were replaced, if even if you come to the conclusion that no, they were not black and black people were not replaced, that does not answer the question of, was there a great replacement? Was there a replacement inside of Egypt? Because, of course, we have the Arabs who claim they dominated Egypt inside of the Islamic times. And we can see it, the evidence, because the Coptics themselves say that they are the true descendants of Egypt, which would make people who are not Coptics not the true descendants of Egypt, which is the majority of Egyptians.
Well, the answer is no.
Wow, I'm shocked.
And I'm saying no because there are a lot of evidence that backs the claim that the ancient Egyptians are the ancestors of modern day Egyptians and were not black.
You know, I was just going to ignore what he said about this so that he can get to his point. But I think it's time to stop for a second and think about what he just said. So in his head, he's thinking by presenting these images that he has presented obvious evidence that proves that these people are the same. Now, despite the fact that, okay, so I want you guys to look down at the bottom. You see that guy there, that pale dude at the bottom? Compare his skin color to the rest of the statues. Then look at the guy next to him, who is slightly darker, but still not as dark as the rest of the ancient Egyptians. Of course, this photo seems like it's taken at a pretty dark period or dark time of the day, which you can make anybody seem dark. You can make white people seem this dark if you take the picture in a precise time, but it still does not match that of the ancient Egyptians. Now, of course, if you compare the previous statues that I showed, both men and women painted as brown, and you can see these people running here on the side, that they too are painted extremely brown. For example, okay, so if you look at the woman in the middle, which again, this might be a version, a spiritual thing, but let's not even go spiritual. Let's say that's her actual skin color. If you look at these two people on the side, clearly they look nothing like these guys color wise. And the question would be, why are they lying about their own skin color if that's what they look like? The fact that he shows images that he believes looks like the original people tells you that he ignores or does not believe that they look like these other ones.
So these Afrocentrics leeching on Egypt's history like actual Egyptians don't exist in order to feel good and boost their inferiority complex are religiously believing that the ancient Egyptians were black.
Again, the way that he puts things is very damaging because he is bootloading, uploading way too much information over the motivations of people. And of course, this is because he cannot address the evidence as well as he thinks he can. So he must, ad hominem attack the people presenting the figures. Think about this. There's actually, and I've seen them, there's actually people within the quote unquote Afrocentric community who present 4 to 5 hours of videos on both the script of the ancient Egyptians and the culture of the ancient Egyptians and these arguments 4 to 5 hours a day of this type of information. And the best that he can come up with is, oh, yeah, they're kind of like inferiority complex, instead of looking at that evidence. If it's so bad, if the evidence is so bad, look at it and tear it apart.
But the truth is, ancient Egyptians were not black Africans or white Europeans or aliens or Arabians. Anything but Egyptians.
So in the beginning, he started by saying that he looked into the DNA of the people in Egypt and that he's going to present it. And I can't wait to see this evidence. I bet you it's the 2017 study, the one that shows for a small period of time, even though ancient Egypt existed for upwards of like 4,000 years. And we're talking about that's only the period when things get interesting. There's still the people who are there prior to that date, but he's going to be focused on that one DNA. But not only that, the fact that he has the nerve to say that they are not black, they are not white, and they're not Middle Eastern, that leaves nobody. If you understand DNA, then you understand that they have to want to be one of those three in order to be part of the Middle East, Africa slash Mediterranean section. If they're not one of those three DNA, then they do not exist.
And modern Egyptians are only the descendants of the ancient Egyptians. There is no single peer-reviewed paper concluding ancient Egyptians were any different to current Egyptians.
I love how he throws up these images like no one's going to talk about them. Let's start with a few things. One, people in the Middle East, especially in Egypt, have black DNA today. So comparing them to the ancient Egyptians is not very smart, especially given the fact that a lot of them will have black African features, even if they're pale. Now, obviously, if we look at this guy, he has some similarities to this one, but they look nothing alike. If you look at the eye shape, if you look at I mean, the nose is similar because they have a broad nose. But if you look at the mouth again, you're looking at two completely different things. It's obvious that the person who is being depicted here is a black African, but obviously he just picks a guy who's standing in the same position. So he goes, oh, he's looking in the same position. He kind of has the same chin, so therefore it's the same person. Also, the ancient Egyptians, the way they depict themselves is like very healthy. This guy has the same face as this person because he is, I mean, I hate to say it, like a plump dude, I guess fat dude. Whereas this king here is not big at all. This is just his head shape. He has obvious higher cheekbones than the dude on the other side. And I can see why you would want to pretend that these two people look alike. But if I was to draw this dude here on the side, he would look nothing like what is on the other side. And I don't know why they keep throwing this in there. There are two hilarious ones after this. First of all, if you think this guy looks anything like the guy on the left, you're being funny. Secondly, clearly, Akhenaten is not realistic in his depiction. And so to think that this is in any indicator of a real person and that they look the same is silly. And I'll come back again to it. Modern Egyptians have an African component, they have a Greek component, they have all these things. And so you can't use them. If you want to use people who are actually could actually represent Egypt, go take people from the Middle East and compare them to people from the Middle East that you know are unmixed and go compare them to the ancient Egyptian statues. Otherwise, you're admitting that the ancient Egyptians have a mixed background, which means you're admitting that the modern ones are mixed, which you don't even have to admit it. We have tests to prove. And we have seen that there has been a change in the modern world. You keep saying that there isn't any DNA test that has proven, or any published paper that has proven. There's many papers that have proven that there has been replacements all over Egypt. Forget papers too. Just look at the demographics. There's something called bottlenecking, and I forgot the other one, but basically, a a group of people, a race of people, are supposed to look identical. They're not supposed to be genetically diverse when you look at them if they live in one specific area for a long time. What if they look genetically diverse? For example, some Egyptians have blonde hair, some of them have dark skin, some of them have light skin. This is a result of having many populations arrive in this one location. So, how can you be sure that you're looking at a population that did not change?
And more importantly, Egyptians never left their homeland. No
If Egyptians never left their homeland, how come we have genetic studies that have proven that even as far up as Syria, there's DNA evidence of Egyptians? That doesn't even make sense.
genocide, no mass immigration has ever happened, or else it will have been properly documented.
Again, I don't understand this idea of there is no mass migration. Do you even understand what most historians say, how Middle Eastern looking people came in to North Africa? And again, this is not that I agree with it, but this is what they actually say. They say that in the Middle East, things were desertifying, so the world was turning into a desert, and then things were greening in Africa, and so they followed the green, and through places like Israel, they came in from the Middle East and went and changed the entire population of North Africa. This would be a mass migration. This would be the biggest mass migration. So to say there is no mass migration is silly. People just say there is no mass migration because they don't, first of all, they don't even know the arguments that are being made by the scholars, even the ones who, this is, by the way, the argument I'm making, it's not the people saying that the ancient Egyptians are black. These are the people saying that they're Asian. They're saying they come from the Middle East, but they come from the Middle East, 10,000 BC is what they claim. But they claim that it's tens of thousands of people who came in and made the entire North African populations. That would be a mass migration. But of course, to this person, that shouldn't exist. So these people just were there in Egypt. Well, then why don't they look like all the other Africans? If they have nothing to do with the Middle East and they're just people from Africa, why don't they look like the rest of the other Africans?
With a population as big as Egypt, it's impossible to alter its gene pool. And in this video, I'll refute and debunk every single claim. We are going to look at the artifacts in the museum, the
I know some of you have heard this before, but I have to talk about this bust of Nefertiti that he shows as if like, oh, this is what the ancient Egyptian looked like. One, there is no other bust in Egypt of this quality. This looks like 1800s quality. Also, it's chipped on the ears instead of the nose, and they say it's because it fell, but the first things that fall off is the nose and stuff like that, not the outside layer of the ears. That doesn't make sense. It looks like it was hit by a hammer. Now, I'm not claiming it's impossible for the ears to have been chipped on their own, but it's very unlikely. Thirdly, it's very human compared to the stuff that ancient Egyptians could create. Fourthly, some people have actually compared the Nefertiti bust to some of the wall paintings, and it almost fits perfectly, meaning that whoever built it with wall paintings in mind. But if you compare any other statue in Egypt, they don't fit with wall paintings. This one is almost traced from the wall painting. Now, this would be not even a question if the only people who claimed it was fake were some quote unquote Afrocentrists. The people who first suggested that it was fake were a bunch of French scholars who came in, looked at it, and were like, oh, that looks like a forgery. And then, of course, you have the history of it being very, very, very sketchy.
DNA and genetic studies, the mummies, the accounts of ancient historians that visited Egypt, the location of ancient Egyptian empire, etc., etc.
So far, what he's provided has been very loose evidence. So I hope when he's diving into these, he dives deep into them and actually tears into the information in a real way and not the way that he's been doing so far, where he's basically throwing insults at Afrocentric people for some reason, as if they are the only people claiming to be Egyptian.
And we're going to start with the factor that most black Afrocentrics care about and are obsessive about, which is skin color. The ancient Egyptians
Well, first of all, quote unquote Afrocentrists are not obsessed with the skin color of the ancient Egyptians. We've already stated that Africans can have multiple skin colors. It's also the hair, the facial textures, the culture, the religion, the language. But because no one ever addresses those, it comes across as if Afrocentrists are just talking about skin color. But you know how many people, linguists, there are that you can sit down and talk to who will have days and days of conversation with you of why the Afro Asiatic language came from Africa and why it's related to other African languages. So to say they're obsessed with it is hilarious. The only reason you think they're obsessed with it is because that's the only side of it that you can debate with. The rest of it takes way too long to learn.
depicted themselves with many colors: red, white, yellow, blue, black, green, etc., etc.
Good. I love that he starts off with such a weak argument, especially if we look into the types of people. So other people would not pause and look at the statue. They would think, oh, he's right. They are depicting Egyptians with so many different colors. This tells me that he knows nothing about what he's talking about. So let's start. The red that is being depicted there, which is a symbol of manhood and strength, is the original color of the Egyptians. It's red and brown, really, and it's usually done with ochre, and it's actually to depict the color brown, not red. Nobody's red, but it's to depict the color brown. But a lot of people, they like to look at it as if it's a red because of the color at the bottom. But as you can see in many different depictions, Egyptians thought of themselves as a type of brown. Now let's go to the blue. That is a god. Egyptians didn't depict themselves as blue ever. That is a god. That is like saying Indians depicted themselves as all kinds of colors, pink, blue. Nope. They depicted their gods in those colors. And the other one is also a god, which by the way is hilarious because he is called the Black in some texts. He's called Kem in some text, which is hilarious because he probably doesn't know that. The next one is black, which he says is underworld or death or fertility. The color black is associated with a lot of things. One of them is spirit realm. The other one is death because spirit realm, and then the other one is fertility because of the ground. It has nothing to do with the underworld. It has to do with the ground. And again, this is a god depiction. This is not real depictions of Egyptians. These are spiritual. And of course, he steps on one which I've already mentioned, yellow. Why so many royal women are depicted as yellow? Some people say it's because they stayed at home all day twiddling their thumbs, and that's why they didn't get a tan. But this is not true because we know that ancient Egyptian women had to work the fields just like the men, and they did a lot of other hard labor outside of just sitting at home and playing with their toes all day. And so they would have had themselves had this tan if there was a tan. So this does not say that the ancient Egyptians have multiple colors. Now I actually know where he got this idea from. This comes from the old Zahi Hawass before he settled on the idea that ancient Egyptians were black. Remember, Zahi Hawass, this is a quote by Zahi Hawass. The ancient Egyptians were black, but they were not Negro. That's what he said. So this means that this guy is denying the majority of Egyptologists who say that the color of the ancient Egyptians would have been a dark brown color. And even the latest DNA study has shown that. So I guess we're off starting good with a fake claim that ancient Egyptians used to depict themselves in multiple colors, when in real life, when they depict themselves in normal, they depicted themselves with that reddish brown color. You know, this one.
Each color has its own particular symbolism. Generally, men were depicted with the reddish tones as a symbol of strength and working under the hot sun. And
Okay, hot sun. Let's see if there are no depictions of dark skinned females to show this masculine. Oh, look, a whole bunch of them. Females everywhere depicted in this dark color. And also to say this is not that, how do you know? Based on what you're showing, it's not obvious what color is being depicted. Also, the other ones at the top are a bit washed. I've seen those original images. The one in the middle is very dark, by the way. The women are also depicted in the same color as the females, as the males. So to sit there and say that it's something to do with the tan, these are queens. Why would a queen have a tan? You notice here, these are three queens. One is sitting on the lap of the other, and they are of different tones, skin tones, which shows that there's a diversity in Egypt, but also they did that so that the color could pop. So, if they were the same color, it would look like the same person with two heads. You can see how dark this one is. Compare which one would you say is closer between the Middle Eastern people who are mixed with Black African DNA too in the middle, or the ones at the bottom. This is a ridiculous theory. And there's, by the way, thousands. In the majority of times, women are depicted in brown.
Women were depicted in white or high yellow tones. Just notice the light skinned women and tan men. In
Sorry, buddy, I've already debunked that. By the way, notice the one at the top. So the one at the top is the leader's wife, and she is depicted in a yellowish glow. This yellowish glow, as he has pointed out in that other image, well, he didn't point out, he just put the image there, which is hilarious, is to resemble symbolic spiritualism. But let's say this is just her skin color. Okay, that's one person who looks like that. Look at the second row. In the second row, there's a bunch of men seated, and in front of them are two women who are talking to them. Those women are the same skin color. At the bottom, you have four women seated. All of these women are dark skinned. So the yellow theory goes out of the window because, of course, it's a very desperate attempt to try and make the people Middle Eastern. It also is very hilarious that somehow they think that the people in the Middle East would depict themselves with these colors when we have people from the Middle East depicting themselves in pale colors. And when we get to the Roman period, Middle Eastern people or Egyptians depict themselves with white, not yellow.
thousands of ancient Egyptian depictions. For example, look at Seti the First temple at Abydos. Look at her, she's yellow.
Okay, so you want me to go look at Seti the First? Well, there you go. Seti the First standing with Hathor. Oh, look at her, she's brown. So much for yellow. It's actually hilarious that he thinks that by picking a image, which by the way, who is that person? Look at her, she's yellow. Seti is a guy. So I don't know what you mean by look at her, she's yellow. This is Seti the First being introduced by Hathor, a female god, and she is depicted as brown.
And look at the family stela of the chief scribe Hohenach, son of Heti, in the Middle Kingdom. And also
Another religious image. Now look at this one. Why is the wife brown? Why is she dark brown? Now you're probably sitting there thinking, okay, but didn't you say that gods are depicted in different color than naturalized color? Well, here's proof that religious symbols are made in different colors. So this is Hathor, and over here she's drawn with a naturalistic reddish color, which is typical of the ancient Egyptians, which is pretty much accepted by most Egyptologists. This is Hathor standing next to a different pharaoh, and this time she is depicted in yellow. As you can see, her color is not consistent. She's not depicted always as brown, and she's not always depicted as yellow. Now, did she go and work the fields? No. She might be a cow in her depictions as Hathor, but that does not take away the fact that she would not be out there working in the fields. How weird. It's obvious. The ancient Egyptians at default thought they were brown. Everybody pretty much agrees with that.
look at Tutankhamun tomb. Notice the reddish skin tone among the men and the yellowish skin tone among women.
Okay, so here's what I want to know. Did he actually look at the information or did he just guess this? To say Tutankhamun's time there were no women depicted with brown is ridiculous. This is Tutankhamun's mom, Nefertiti, alleged mom, and as you can see, she is depicted as brown. This is Tutankhamun's sister slash wife, and she is depicted as dark brown, just like Tutankhamun. So where does he get this idea that ancient Egyptians during Tutankhamun's time were being depicted as yellow if they were female, when in fact this is possibly the time when men and women are depicted with the same color the most. By the way, here's a statue of Nefertiti and her husband Akhenaten before they started doing the transformation in art. So this is what they look like. Both brown skin. Notice how the bust is yellow. Both brown skin. Both depicted holding hands and having a very typical Egyptian look. And then all of a sardine, these people are looking like Europeans based off of statues that are in question, which is hilarious. Now, I don't want to downplay the artistic skill of the ancient Egyptians, but look at the type of busts they were creating. Look at the hair, look at the faces, look at the color of the skin. These are the sisters of Tutankhamun, and they have typical Egyptian look. They're not that big an upgrade artistically from what was around, but somehow that Nefertiti bust that looks, look at the broadness of the nose. How can that woman give birth to people who look anything like this? This is silly. Also, why is Nefertiti depicted as brown, but then on her bust, all of a sudden she's depicted as yellow? Are they confused? And then, if that's true, right, you could say, oh, maybe a bust is different than, okay, so here's a bust of Tutankhamun's sisters. They're depicted as brown in the busts and the paintings. Why the consistency there?
Another example is Queen Soret from the 20th dynasty and Ramses the First tomb, who is the father of Seti the First and grandfather of Ramses the Second. As you can see, there are three colors in that image: yellow, red, and green.
Okay, so this is a very terrible image to use. First of all, he uses Ta as if he is a good piece of evidence for skin color of ancient Egyptians. He is not, he is a god. He has nothing to do with the skin color. I think the one in the middle, that might be Ramses the First. And then if he says that Senmerset or whatever, that's fine. But let's look at this image right here. This is the image of the goddess Ma'at. Ma'at clearly has a feather on her head in the exact same way as the other one. This goddess is not human, and so she is depicted in the color befitting a goddess. Now, let's go to Ramses the second, who is the son of Ramses the first wife, who ruled in her own right, Nefertari. So we can see here Nefertari colored in typical brown. And remember, she is related to Ramses the First. So the idea that all of this has to do with, oh, they have diverse colors because they depict themselves in such diverse colors because they're so creative, that's nonsense.
Each has its own symbolic meaning, and this is the all yellow tomb of Maya.
Before he goes to the all symbolic tomb of Maya, let's first talk about the fact that symbolism does not mean it's not a natural color. Just because something symbolizes something does not mean it has nothing to do with the natural color. Just like how, pale skin can symbolize beauty in Renaissance Europe, right? But people actually did have white skin. Some of them powdered their skin to make it even whiter than what it is naturally. But that does not mean that the symbol overrides the reality.
Who was the wet nurse of Tutankhamun. And also there are Mediterranean and Middle Eastern populations follow the same coloring system.
Okay, so he says there are some populations that have the same coloring system. So there were every single culture agreed with each other that they should use these colors as symbols. Or here's something else that you're not looking at. How about that's really their skin color? Like, for example, if we take the Minoans, we know that some Minoans, even in your image, you can see it, are painted as pale white, while others are painted as brown, which means that some of them were pale white and some of them were brown. By the way, you said other populations. The only ones you put on here was Mycenaean Minoans, Cretan Minoans, Clidian Minoans, which are this like that's just Minoans, and then Egyptian depiction of Minoans. So four of these don't even count. Romans, who typically depicted themselves as pale, I don't even know why you're adding them into this. Assyrians and Persians, again, depicted themselves as pale, in some situations dark, but we know that the Persians were a large population anyway that included people from dark countries. By the way, here's an image. See, what we're looking here at is something, but you have to look at it with the context of it. If we just did what he did, we would just be like, oh, look, some of the Arabs are depicted as dark black, therefore Arabs are dark black. Actually, if we look at some of these images, you can tell that some of these people are foreign to these regions, like this Ethiopian man that is depicted here with a sword. That is someone from Ethiopia. I think the guy in the middle is from China. Others are from Arabia, Persia, and places like that. Clearly, the Arabians thought they were pale of skin.
Ironically, the Afrocentrics are claiming the Moors, Assyrians, Persians, Olmecs, it's unstoppable. Nobody is safe. And also, there are a lot of these Afrocentric mumbo jumbo in the internet, such as these. But the ancient Egyptians distinguished themselves very clearly from their southern neighbors.
They also separate themselves from their Middle Eastern neighbors, which is something that people don't want to talk about because, of course, if they separate, if your thing is correct, that if they separate themselves from people, it means that they don't look like those people. Okay, well then the Amu, the Nahesi or the Nubians, and the Tohoni or the Libyans all don't look like Egyptians. But if we go look today, Libyans look like Egyptians. We go look today, Middle Easterners look like Egyptians. So basically debunked in like 5 seconds. The obvious truth is that they depicted people from these places very different from themselves in order to spread propaganda that the people are completely different than Egyptians and they've been subdued. And you know how I know outside of these people being tied up? You can see there that there are bows at the top of Tutankhamun's slipper. So on one side, there's a Middle Eastern guy. On the other side, there's a Nubian guy. But if you notice at the top, there's a bunch of bows, bow and arrows. But those bows represent the nine bows, which is the symbolic term for enemies of Egypt.
The Nubians, who are the Kushites. As you can see, the ancient Egyptians depicted themselves very different from the black Africans. But during the Middle Kingdom era, King Senusret III established castles and fortresses such as the Buhen Fortress and Semna Castle to protect the southern border. As the southern boundary made in year 8 under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Hachaure Senusret III, and it is to prevent that any Nubian shouldn't cross it by sailing north or by land. As you can
First of all, the Buhan fortress was not to stop Nubians from crossing. It was to stop the enemies of Egypt or people from the Kushite empires from entering. There also was a fortress in Asia that was built at the same time. There also was a fortress in Libya that was built at the same time, which means they didn't want anybody coming. It had nothing to do with stopping black Africans from coming in. It had to do with stopping people from coming in. And I have a long video that I've already uploaded many times, but I've uploaded a dedicated video on the one in Libya that prevented the Libyans from coming in, and I've made a one that's dedicated to Syria, or the one dedicated to Israel and the Sinai Peninsula.
see this image representing a Sphinx crushing an Asian and a Nubian.
Okay, at least this image is a little more honest than the previous one that he put up. So it's got an Asian and a Nubian, a Middle Eastern basically, and a Nubian. And as you can see, the Middle Eastern person still looks nothing like the Egyptian. The Nubian admittedly looks nothing like the Egyptian, except that they don't have hair on their faces. except the false beard. And then, of course, you can see that the Egyptian has a very typical African face. Again, if these people are Middle Eastern, why don't they just look like the other Middle Eastern people, as the modern Egyptians do?
And at that time, Asian means Phoenicians or Canaanites or the Syriacs. Another picture
Or Bedouins, or so many other tribes that existed that would come during the time.
of an Egyptian soldier fighting a Nubian. Another example of a picture is this. Amenhotep III depicted as a lion devouring Egypt's enemy. Observe how Amenhotep is depicted in a completely different way from how the Nubian is, and how he's of the same color and phenotype of the Asians or the sea people.
Oh, is that right? Okay, so let's compare. So, just opposite of the Sphinx, if you look to the other side, you can see an Asiatic person. He has a giant beard. His head shape is very different than that of the Egyptian. You can't even see his face because of the giant beard. So, to say that he has features that are similar doesn't even make any sense. At the bottom, you can see a Nubian, but notice how his face is exactly the same as that of the person above. But we don't even need to go there. Look at his hair. That is the haircut that is typical in Egypt.
Another example depicting the Nubian captives depicted at Ramses II Abu Simbel temples. And here is another example of the Nubians.
I don't know where he's trying to go with this. Oh, look, there are captives. What does that mean? Here's some Asiatic captives on the other side of the wall. Literally, by the way, if you go to Abu Simbel, the Abu Simbel Temple, you will see that on one side of the wall they have captive Nubians. On the other side of the wall they have captive Asiatics. And so, what does that mean? And by the way, both of them look nothing like the Egyptians, the way they depicted themselves. This is probably due to propaganda of the Egyptians trying to make them seem like outsiders, when in other times of ancient Egyptian history, they look at them as their people.
As it shows Ramses II smiting a Nubian from the temple of Nefertiti at Abu Simbel as a form of humiliation.
Well, here's an image that you're not going to show where they're smiting a Nubian, an Asian, and a Libyan all at once, or at least they are in the captive arms of the Egyptians.
King Tutankhamun depicted his Libyan, Asian, and Nubian enemies on his statue.
I'm glad he actually showed this. Look how pale and yellow skin the Asiatic depictions are. You can see that when they depict the Asiatics, it's nothing close to the color of the Egyptians. Sure, the Nubian is pale, is dark black, but clearly there is a difference between the color of the Egyptians and the color of the Asiatics, which again I will say today, most people from Egypt, they just have the same color as people from the Middle East.
His walking stick, his leg rest, his slippers, so every time he steps on a foot, it is as he's stepping on his enemies. So you've seen how black people were depicted in ancient Egypt. If ancient Egyptians were black people, their depiction of themselves has to be similar to the Nubians, right? But in reality is their depiction feature-wise is more similar to other Mediterranean peoples such as the Asiatics and the Libyans. So
Where the hell did he get the idea that the Libyans and the Middle Eastern people are depicted any closer to Egyptians than the Nubians are? I don't see evidence for that anywhere.
if you agree with me, modern Egyptians are ancient Egyptians are modern Egyptians. This is genetic continuity. And if you disagree with me, well, stick around and see reality. Because only the Egyptians have stayed where they were and remained what they were, although they have changed their language twice and their religion. In a sense,
Yeah. So they basically changed the entire culture, they changed the entire religion. Everything that used to be ancient Egypt died, but for some reason, the exact same population is occupying the exact same place, even though we know that they have been dominated by several different other clans for thousands of years. Come on now.
They continue to be the world's oldest nation. Because for most of their history, Egypt has been a state, but only in recent years has it been truly a nation state, with a government claiming the allegiance of its subjects on the basis of a common identity.
I don't know what he's talking about, but he's wrong. So let's just move on to the next part.
As here are the depictions of Egyptians of the Ali dynasty. Do they look like modern Egyptians or sub Saharans?
Well, if we zoom in, we can see that they look like sub Saharans. Look at this guy's face. Look at his hair. Now this guy. See when you're putting them amongst these pale people and then saying, "Oh, look, we're all this one shade." First of all, you're lying because there's definitely darker images you could have used. But secondly, why did you carefully select these things?
Some are also saying that the iconic bust of Queen Nefertiti and the statue of Prince Rahotep and his wife Nofet and the seated scribe, and the statue of Metri, Ranefer, statue of Ramses II, the statue of Khafre, and the statue of Menkaure, etc., they are claiming that these are all fake artifacts.
Well, I will tell you that the bust is not an Afrocentric plot. A lot of people say that it's fake, and the people, since it was discovered, there were people claiming that it was fake. So to say that it's like some weird Afrocentric thing again is wrong. By the way, do you not know that there are fakes in Egypt? That there are actually people in the past who used to fake statues so that they could give sell them.
Because these statues doesn't fit their narrative and they are claiming it to be fake or whitewashed. So the Afrocentrics are using this statue as a proof that King Nama was black. But that's not a statue of Nama, as it has no names depicted in it. Neither no one knows who that is. It is just the Petri guessing. And
Okay, but Nama did unify the North and the South, and in the North and the South, there were Nubians all over the place, and they were depicted being smited, and they were depicted as being unified. There's also his wife, who is thought to have come from Nubia. So there's so much information here. By the way, the palette of this person, Narmer, was found in Upper Egypt.
even if he was, his features is literally similar to the current Egyptian president.
Nope, they're not that similar. Again, you can see the broad nose, the full lips, and the eyes. Clearly, they're this person, the president of Egypt, is clearly to some degree mixed anyway, but it doesn't even matter.
Because the actual fact is, it's still Egyptian features, not black at all. And to debunk Mr. Hotepshit, Egyptian men with rough features and kinky hair type who look like they're wooden pieces. That Mr. Hotepshit claims that it was very popular in Kemet, the original inhabitants of the Nile Valley. And here are the hundreds of thousands of faces of the Egyptians who lived 2000 years ago from the 1st to the 3rd century AD. The actual
Again, he discludes the ones that are dark black, so I don't even need to look at each single one to know that he is carefully selecting these. Show me the president that looks like this person in skin color and make sure he's not mixed.
historical, archaeological, and scientific fact that Egyptian people, ancient or not, are the native people of Egypt and they are not Romans or Greeks as these Afrocentrics claim. Because
Well, I'm not saying that have absolutely no tie to the ancient world, as Egypt is right next to the Middle East. So it's possible that they could have come in as early as ever. Who knows when they first came in? What I'm going against is this idea that you have that is an extreme take, that you claim there were no black people in ancient Egypt, which is very ridiculous, especially since, let's say this is a wig. They're wearing a Nubian wig. Well, you need Nubians to have a Nubian wig.
Because neither Romans nor Greeks nor Arabians practiced mummification, but cremation in case of the Romans and Greeks, and burial in case of the Arabians. Mummification was a solely Egyptian practice in the whole Mediterranean and Middle East region.
That's not entirely true, but we can get back to that one in another video.
And anthropological and genetic study have proven they are closer to the Egyptians than any European population, and for sure they look like the Egyptians. As you can see, there's
That's his exploration of DNA. He's just gonna show a picture and move on. This is a piss poor video.
strong resemblance from the Egyptians of the Pharaonic period to modern day Egyptians. I mean, just focus to the facial features,
That's right. Just focus on the facial features of this digitally created image.
skin color, hair texture, eye shapes, nose shapes, lip shapes, everything. It's exactly the same. This is what genetic continuity looks like. I mean, look at Egyptian actress Sausan Badr. She resembles her most likely ancestor, Queen Nefertiti, and in which is the same thing to many random Egyptians around Egypt. And important thing to know about the ancient Egyptians are the Fellahin. The Fellahin of Egypt are the indigenous rural villagers mostly living in the Nile Valley. They are believed to be among the oldest farmers on earth, whose high
This entire video is incorrect in everything that it says. Let's start with the fact that a lot of there's a king's list that leaves out the Nefertiti line because they say that they are from foreign rule. So let's start there. If you think everybody's just straight up from Egypt, if you look at the pharaohs, you've got another thing coming. We also know that they also did fuse, even though they were into incest as a way of making their line pure. They also did infuse a lot of foreign people when they wanted to make alliances with foreign countries, like in the case of the Mitanni. And since this guy is going with the mainstream idea of farming, those people are not the oldest farmers. The oldest farmers would be located in the Sumerian regions thousands of years before, and then they would have been marched into Egypt. So that's if you're talking about the mainstream ideas.
productive agriculture characterized by total reliance on irrigation and intensive labor contributed to the rise of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Given Egypt's proximity to the origin and development of Christianity, the Fellahin culture cannot be considered isolated from Christian influence. Notably, the majority of the Fellahins are Muslims. And even according to the English Egyptologist Sir Wallis Budge, he said about the Egyptian that no amount of alien blood has so far succeeded in destroying the fundamental characteristics, both physical and mental, of the dwellers of the Nile mud.
Okay, so there's like a minute left in this video. So let's just finish it by saying this. Didn't they say that ancient Egyptians had a 10% increase of black DNA, substantial DNA, since those 2017 studies? So clearly something has changed. And I find it hilarious, by the way, that the DNA change is mainly sub Saharan African. It tells you something.
I.e., the Fellahin, the Fella or tiller of the ground, who is today what he was ever been. So, guys, if you want to see or meet a pure blood Egyptian, go look at the Fellahin, because
If you want to meet a real Egyptian, you can't, because the ancient Egyptians are gone. The people today are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, but they are not the ancient Egyptians, not in culture or reality in any way, shape, or form. That's like saying, let's go meet, some tribe from 100,000 years ago. Oh, we're going to go meet the Khoisan. It's like, they're genetically related, but they're not the same tribe. Anyway, I'm done with this.
These people are pure Egyptian, zero Arabian blood, zero Turkish blood, zero Levantine blood, zero. And the reason why
Okay, I thought I was done until he said that stupid thing. Okay, so this part is really funny. He says zero Turkish blood. Isn't it funny that we have a genetic test from 2025 that shows Sumerian DNA 20%? And he says zero Turkish, zero dead wrong.
Egyptian people kinda have this skin color that resemble the white and black mixed people in America or the West. Because one
Oh, isn't that weird? That the ancient Egyptians seem to have a color of a mixed race African slash Middle Eastern or European DNA. Well, that's kind of strange, don't you think?
of their Neolithic ancestor was a dark person who was the Natufian or the Levant farmer. So, how do I know they were dark? You might be asking. Well, look at the people with the highest Natufian ancestry, the modern South Arabians, the people from Socotra or Al Mahra. They appear to be dark skinned with Caucasoid facial features.
Okay, so why would they have their features had gone away and been replaced with the pale people that you keep showing over and over again instead of the dark skin depicting ancient Egyptians?
And because in Neolithic times these people mixed with the Anatolian farmer who was white. How do I know? Because the Sardinian people have the highest Anatolian farmer derived ancestry.
The way he's using that these people have the highest DNA of this type, therefore that's exactly what they look like. You know, there's people with like high African DNA, but they actually look like white people. When you look at them, they're closer to white people. And then there's people with like high white DNA, but when you look at them, they look like black people. You can't just say they were mixed, therefore they look like this. You have no idea what they look like if they were mixed.
These two people mixed together with the Iranian farmer and the Caucasus hunter-gatherer. The fusions of these ancient people have bled into these people known as the Egyptian. Ancient
Okay, I guess we have to finish off with a contradiction. So first he says the people who are in Egypt are the people in Egypt and they didn't come from everywhere. And now he's saying the people from Egypt came from literally everywhere is now what he's saying. And that they mass migrated.
or not. That's it for part 1 of this video series debunking the Afrocentric claim of Black Egypt. And in the next video, I will be talking about the culture, the customs, and the genetic cluster.
Boy, I can't wait. With this level of scholarship, I'm sure I'll learn something new. Anyway, this video took a long time. Like, share, subscribe, donate if you can. Remember, it doesn't have to be $10 like the others did. It can be lower than that. Anything will do. Thank you very much.